In this lesson, we'll work on adding a stretchy spine setup. So this is going to be another one of those features we'll add to our rig that's going to allow us to get the most amount of control out of our character in his upper body, in his torso. One thing I find is a pet peeve of mine, you can say, is when a rig is limited by its control. Okay, what I mean by that is, let's say if this whole chain were joined together, even this chest piece, okay, what would happen if we were to move this chest, even though it may look like it has a stretch already, notice how this bone, this top bone here, is just staying in place. And that's an example of being limited by our controls, in that we couldn't really move our character wherever we like so we can get the best type of animation possible. Okay, so what we want to do is to prevent that by adding that stretchy spine onto our character, and the animator would really appreciate that much more, adding that type of control. So that's one of the benefits of utilizing the stretchy spine, and this works for photoreal characters too. Even though they won't stretch and squash as much, you still want to make sure that they are not limited to the amount of movement that they can have, so we can really get the greatest animation possible we can from our rig. So let's go ahead and work on doing just that. What we need is some information. We need to know the length of this curve. This is going to be similar in some way to what we did with the legs, but we won't need any if-then statements. We're just going to keep, or if-else statements that is, we're just going to keep that squash and stretch activated, again, so we don't limit ourselves. So we're going to need the length of the curve. We're also going to need some information as far as making sure that our joints at the initial state of the squash and stretch will still maintain a value of 1, so we can still preserve our bind pose, and so nothing skews. So we need to know that information, and we also need to make sure that we preserve our volume as we squash and stretch. We're going to be adding some volume to this, and that is very important with squash and stretch, because if an object doesn't maintain its volume, then as the character squashes and stretches, he'll just look skewed. So let's go ahead and work on these tasks that we currently have. And again, we do need to also make sure that it's going to scale correctly with our rig. So those are a few things that we're going to be working on. So what we'll do is first go ahead and apply our arc length. That's why we added that tool, so we can determine the length of this curve and help us when it comes to write our expression for the squash and stretch. So we'll select our curve in here, or from the outliner, whichever you'd prefer. Then we want to go to our hypershade, okay, hypergraph or hypershade, whichever you prefer, but I like using the hypershade. So with that now selected, we also want to bring out our window that we've made. Here it is, for our node generator. So with the curve selected, all we should need to do is click our curve info, and notice one has been created. Here it is. Excellent. So with that now done, we can hit Control A to get to our attribute editor, go to our curve info, and here's our arc length. So we're going to need that value there. That's going to help us determine the values we need for our stretch. So we have our curve info. We'll give it a name just so that everything will stay organized. So we could call it cinfo_sp for spine 01 and hit enter. Now that it has been named, we can go ahead and close out our node generator window. We're going to need not only the curve, but also a multiply divide node. That's going to help us to make sure that our rig will not only squash and stretch right, but also that it will scale properly too. And this is another example of where we're going to really see the power of this multiply divide node, how it all works together to give us the results that we're looking for out of our rig. So let's go ahead and make that multiply divide node. Again, we can bring back our window, okay, and just go ahead and create it. There it is. Close out the window, and we can give it a name. We'll call it div_sp for spine 01. As far as the operator, let's go ahead and switch that to divide. Okay. All right. So now, just like what we did with the leg or something similar, we need to take this value from our curve info. We'll go ahead and select it. Once we've selected the curve and go to our curve info, we'll copy it. We'll go back to our multiply divide, and we want to paste it right there in input 1 and also input 2 as well. Okay, now as far as the rest of the inputs, the way we're going to be using it for our expression, we won't need to put in a 1. okay, for our other attributes. That's just the way we used it for the legs. That called for it since we were using it directly. But this is going to be more indirect. What we're actually going to do, this is going to be really cool. What we're actually going to do is take these values that we have here and make another attribute that will allow us to maintain a value of 1. Now, how is that going to be possible? Well, since we're using a divide node here, when we do our proper connections, what's going to happen is that we're basically going to say this number in input 1x divided by this number here in input 2x is going to equal to 1, and that's going to work together for us when it comes to making sure our joints stay at a value of 1 in its original state, and it's going to work with our scale as well, being that the scale needs to have a value of 1, or the scale is equal to a value of 1 to keep our character at his default position. So it's all going to work together. So let's go ahead and work on that. With the divide node selected, we need to go up to modify, and we'll go to add attribute. And what we can do is even make sure that we're in our channel box so we can see the attributes that we're adding. So this one, we could just call it arc len, just so we know it's for our arc length on the divide node, and we'll make it displayable. This is a category name. And for the actual attribute, we could call that arc scale. And make that keyable, no limitations, just hit OK. So, how do you presume we're going to make this scale equal to 1 while still tying it into the multiply divide? And we're going to need to tie it into the multiply divide so everything can move relative as far as the scale of our bones go. So, this does need to be connected to this arc scale. But remember, it's as simple as using the division that we've set. So it's going to be this number divided by its same number equal to 1. So what we need to do is go to our divide node, right click on it once we see our icon change, right click, and we're going to go to output X, so that'll control our arc scale. So now we right click on the node again and go right to arc scale. And notice now it is equal to 1. So this is really cool. Okay, and again, these values, as they update, will also update this number as we need it to. Okay, so once this has been established, what we also want to do is make sure that we basically get to our arc length as well, because we need to tie that arc length right back into our input 1x. Again, so everything will move relative. So with our curve selected, we'll select our curve. We'll also shift select our divide node for the spine and go to our input output connections. From there, let's go ahead and get a better view. There we are. What we need to do is take this divide node, and we'll also take our curve info. Here it is. Bring it in front of the divide node so we know that's going to be the driver. The arc length of this is going to be the driver of our input X, which is working together with our arc scale. This is another joy about rigging. So what we'll do is go to our curve info, wait for the icon to change right to the right of it, go to our arc length, and tie that into our not arc scale, but our input 1x. Notice as we select our divide node, it's now connected, and we still maintain a value of 1. So now all of these things are done. We can minimize our hypershade and get right to our expression to work on writing the expression that we're going to need. So let's give it a name. This is going to be called stretchy spine. Okay, I should probably stop doing that. All right. Well, our first stretch is going to be for the vertical scale. So we'll go ahead and call it vert scale. Okay, we won't worry about the volume just yet. And what I'd like to do is write variables, because that helps us to really speed up making any changes to our expression if we need to. So for the variable, we'll put $V scale for vertical scale is equal to, what's that going to be equal to? That's going to be equal to our arc scale divided by our character scale. So everything will move concertedly. So we'll put just that. We'll put div underscore sp01 dot arc scale divided by char scale 01 dot, and I like to use sy. Again, that's just a preference of mine, but you can go ahead and use whichever other scale parameter that you like. This is just a preference of mine again. So I use that and hit create, and now we have our variable made for us. So this is going to need to get tied right into our joints. So again, we're going to tie it from our bone spine A all the way to bone spine C. Don't need to worry about the top bone. So knowing that, now we need to write our next part of the expression that is going to allow us to have our vertical scale. So we'll type that in. That's going to be bn underscore SPA01 dot SX. We want to put the scale X. That's going to allow us to scale vertically because of the orientation that we chose for our joints, is equal to, not V scale just yet. What we can do to shorten our expression is to have this tied to the next bone, tied to the next bone, tied to V scale. So I'd like to do that again just to save some room. So we'll put is equal to bn SPB01.SX is equal to bn underscore SPC01.SX equal to now our variable. So $V scale. Now watch this. If we go ahead and run this edit, everything's working fine. If we minimize our expression editor, watch what we're able to do. If we select our spine now and move it, notice everything is going to be stretching just the way we need it to. Notice how that bone is not staying in place. And you can see here how we're going to be able to prevent any limitations from our rig from doing so. So this is a really cool setup. But not only is that working, if we go to our character scale, how is this going to work? If we go ahead and scale and our character down, notice it is still scaling the way we like it to. No skewing at all. We can still come to our control even with him looking like a little Thumbelina. Okay? Even if we scale him that low, it's still going to work just the way we like it to, no matter how we scale him. So, again, before we close off this lesson, we've established the way to add a squash, or actually a stretch, to our rig. And we're going to work on adding the volume preservation in the next lesson. But we've also looked at the way to make our multiply divide node work for us, so we can preserve our scale, our character scale. So that's the end of this lesson, and in the next lesson we'll get right to seeing how we can add some volume and how we can control that volume.